Well, joining us now in the studio is Senior Correspondent for Bloomberg Israel, Calev Ben David. Thanks for joining us, Calev.
Pleasure to be here as always, Aryeh.
So, Calev, you were down in the Gaza Strip area and you saw one of these tunnels. The Army took you on a trip to one of these tunnels.
Yes.
What were your impressions about this?
I tell you, Aryeh, you really actually have to be impressed by the effort and engineering that went into these tunnels, these terror tunnels. The one I went in stretches 3 kilometers. It begins in Khan Yunis, in a greenhouse, I was told. And the point I went in was about 1 kilometer from Kibbutz Nir Am, which is, of course, where that other, this was not the tunnel that was the scene of the used for that attack that was last week. It was one that was discovered earlier. And the tunnel is an impressive piece of work. The sides are fashioned with prefabricated concrete slabs. There were obviously thousands of tons of cement used in this tunnel. It had electrical wiring going through that was used for lighting. It was a space in which a man wearing full body armor, carrying a weapon, could walk through upright. The combat engineering officer who took me through said basically in discovering that tunnel, they had prevented not just an attack on, for example, Kibbutz Nir Am, but a mega terror attack.
Now, these are the attack tunnels that you saw.
Right.
What about the other underground tunnels where perhaps the Hamas leadership is being held out? What is the Army doing about that?
Look, let's be fair, Aryeh. Those bunkers, they really, I would say tunnels or bunkers, are really based more in the heavily populated areas of the Gaza Strip, more to the western side of the Gaza Strip, perhaps in areas like Gaza City or some of the refugee camp neighborhoods. For the Army to have to go in there, we would really be looking at casualties even well beyond what we've had both on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. And I think at this stage, there's no point to do that unless Israel was totally committed to overthrowing Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Prime Minister said that's not the goal here. The goal is really just to go after those tunnels.
Well, even if we manage to destroy all these tunnels, what's going to prevent Hamas from rebuilding them in the future?
Well, that's a good question. As you know, Israel is actually, last October, they restricted the import of cement and concrete into Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. Not all of it, but much of it. There was a lot of criticism from the UN and from human rights groups about that. I think one thing they might be looking to do is working with the Egyptians more to try to prevent smuggling in of some of these materials used to build the tunnels. The Egyptians, who are now much more hostile to Hamas than they formerly were, have closed off those tunnels. And Israel might also, in part of these negotiations, looking for some kind of international monitoring in the Gaza Strip. They spoke about it. But of course, Israel's experience with international monitors in Gaza and elsewhere has not been successful.
Well, Calev, what do you think in terms of the ceasefire what could the terms be that would satisfy Israel? I mean, Hamas is trying to, after this would be over, they would renew their rearmament. What could Israel expect after this time?
Well, first of all, let me make it clear, because we have been talking about there was this temporary ceasefire for 7 days on the table. Israel turned that down specifically because under it they would not have been permitted to carry on their operations against destroying these terror tunnels. The officer I spoke with said it probably would take about at least a week just to destroy the tunnels that they found. Israel's not going to accept a temporary truce in which they cannot complete their effort of destroying the tunnels. Looking forward, the Prime Minister has spoken of the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. I mean, that's a pretty high goal, probably, of course, 100% unrealistic. But again, I think what we'll be looking at is maybe tighter border controls, working together with Egypt. There's been talk about even maybe the Palestinian Authority putting back official people in the Gaza Strip to maintain the Gaza's borders with Egypt. But we'll have to see. Those ideas have been talked about in the past, and Hamas at the end of the day has not accepted them.
Well, those are concrete elements that you talk about, tighter border controls. What about the issue of deterrence? I mean, we're not over this yet, and looking in retrospect, looking at the 2006 war against Hezbollah in Lebanon, it has been deterred. Why was Israel able to deter Hezbollah and not Hamas?
Well, first of all, First of all, let's look at Hamas for a second. Hezbollah has been a little preoccupied by internal Lebanese politics. They've also, the war with Syria, that maybe has been a factor, where Hamas has been getting quite desperate because of its relations with Egypt, and that may have provoked it into this attack and increasing the rocket attacks on Israel and almost welcoming this offensive. But I have to say, if you look back at that 2006 Lebanon war, at the time, a lot of people thought it was a failure. They thought that the agreements that were made then would not end up deterring Hezbollah. It's only looking back now we realize that there was a strategic change. So it's going to be too early. I think it's going to take months, if not longer, to really know what kind of deterrence effect on Hamas this operation has had.
And yet the West Bank, we've had a flare-up of violence there. We've had 6, maybe 7 people killed in the past 2 days. There's been calls from Hamas leadership to have a third intifada. What do you think? Are we on the verge of a third intifada?
Aryeh, I really can't count the many times I've been on the show, and you and others have asked me if the third intifada is started. And it's true that there have been incidents. We saw some serious incidents on Thursday, disturbances after the report of the shelling of this UN hostel shelter in Gaza. But at the end of the day, Friday was fairly quiet. And overall, I think what you have to be impressed with is how relatively quiet the West Bank has been, even less so in terms of other times when there's been operations in Gaza and also in the Arab world. So I think by the evidence we have now, we don't see really signs of a third intifada. I expect, especially if we get more reports of rising civilian casualties of Hamas in Gaza, we will see more outbreaks of violence in the West Bank. But the evidence so far is nothing like a more wide-scale intifada.
Well, Calev Ben David, senior correspondent for Bloomberg in Israel. Always a pleasure to have your insight. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, and I hope we'll have a more peaceful week ahead of us for the people of Israel.